Hi, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of Module 4, which is comparing to back half. Today, we'll discuss specifically same bench comparisons. 3 parts to this, which we'll discuss today. Firstly, on evaluating completely new extensions. Secondly, on vertical extensions. And thirdly, on contradictions. Let's start with the first, completely new extensions. How do we assess the importance or the contribution of a new extension? Reminder, a extension existing or new material existing is a necessary condition for winning, but not a sufficient condition for winning. You can have an extension and still lose to your top half. So, first off, the first step we need to do when assessing this is make sure that we flag back to all the material that was already proven by the opening team. And in this, it is important because remember, people have a bias to remember more what was said last. We tend to remember the bottom lines and the big flashy things from the opening team, but we remember much more from the bottom half if we don't go through our notes afterwards, right? We have just heard the weighings as well as the rebuttals given by the whip. What we should do is not just buy into those weighings blindly, but go back to our notes and see if opening had any preemptive material to engage that. So did they have any preemptive responses or framing that are important in this consideration? Did they preemptively weigh and explain why in advance their material is probably the most important in the debate? All of these things should be considered. This is step 1. Once we've gone through all the material and we have everything to compare between both teams, what are the metrics that we will use for comparison? First, extent of analysis. On extent of analysis, few important things. The first thing to say is, if an argument was just stated and not analyzed, even if it is not explicitly refuted, it is still not analyzed. I think a common mistake often done here is the idea that because we need to be non-interventionist judges and not rebut an argument that was not rebutted within the debate, it means that it's enough for a team to just state and a nuclear war would happen, and by that, finish their job. Obviously, we also don't want to err too much on the other side of being too interventionist and putting a very high burden of what is to be analyzed. And just because we can come up with a brilliant response to something, it means the argument doesn't stand. How do we address the problem of not erring too much on either side? The answer to this, like the answer to most things in judging debates, is going to be just be comparative. Proven or not proven isn't a binary. It is something that exists on a spectrum. A claim can be proven better or worse, can have more or less analysis. If a team says the sentence, the motion might lead to nuclear war, it's not nothing. It does raise the possibility that it might lead to a nuclear war. And the extent to which we can credit it is that there is a possibility that it might lead to a nuclear war, but not a plausibility, not a likelihood that they did not analyze. This is not us stepping in and rebutting them. They just didn't prove it yet, right? So we need to ask ourselves, to what extent was the argument actually proven? On that note, we can still credit them for what was standing with the analysis, even if they didn't end up reaching their bottom line. Because we acknowledge that analysis isn't a binary, we can accept partial proof. As an example, a team might claim that certain sanctions on Russia would lead to a nuclear war, and probably not prove it because it's a very high burden to prove. But in the reasons they give as to why it will provoke the elites and the government, and why it would lead to more distrust in the global community, and why it would lead to them having less to lose, etc. While they might not get to the extent of a nuclear war, they did probably prove a general backlash point that could have a smaller impact. So we can still credit them for proving a harm, even if it's not the harm they promise to prove. And then the only thing we need to do is, again, be comparative. Ask ourselves, what is the extent of analysis that was proven by opening, and what's the extent of analysis that was proven by closing? The team that had more analysis is often, not always, the team that's going to win. So extent of analysis is one metric we consider. Second metric is going to be impact, like how important is an argument within the debate, and connected to this to some extent, the third metric is going to be the burden of the argument itself. I'm going to be a bit more explicit on this to not confuse people. Some arguments are more intuitive than others. It does not mean that we automatically buy them or that we automatically discredit an argument that is not intuitive, but it's important to note that the extent of analysis needs to meet the burdens of the claim as well. So if someone takes a very, very large impact to prove, but doesn't end up proving it, they're not going to win just because they claimed a bigger impact. Usually, the more intuitive a claim is, the less analysis it would require to prove. Begs the question again, how do we avoid being interventionist judges? Usually what I suggest is, rather than stepping into the debate and filling in links for teams, ask yourselves, had I stepped into the debate, how much would I need to fill in for the team for their argument to stand? For an example, if both top half and bottom half, if both OG and CG didn't prove their point to the fullest extent, I can still say it would require me less logical steps to fill in for OG than it does for CG for their case to stand. I am not going to step into the debate and fill in those steps for any of them, and they're going to still be penalized in speaker scores for it, and refutations that are going to address them are still going to be as effective as the analysis that they did provide requires. However, when I compare between the two teams, I can ask myself which requires more filling in. And the team that usually has the more intuitive claim and the less burdens to fill in for it is often, again, not always, going to win. This is going to be complementary with the metric of analysis. If a team took a bigger burden, but they proved it and had more analysis, they still can still win on the bigger burden. And the third metric we often consider is relevance to the debate. So this is kind of a meta criterion. But generally, when we ask ourselves which team should win, we ask ourselves which team convinced us more that their side of the debate should be winning. And for this, obviously, relevance is important. The same argument can be very important in one room and very unimportant in a different room. If an argument was conceded, it's probably useless. If an argument is heavily contested, it's probably important. However, do not overstep with crediting relevance. A very common weighing that bottom half teams try to often do is saying something like, well, OG had a principal case and OO had a practical case, and we engaged OO on the practical and we won them on their own metric. Therefore, we should also win OG because we win OO on their strongest side. This could work, but not always. If CG won OO on OO's metric, it means CG won OO. But if OG already won OO, for example, if they prove that the principle is more important than the practical in a given debate, they can still win CG, even if CG won OO on their own metric. OO's metric isn't magically more important. So if the challenge from the opposing bench was very strong to the extent of probably winning top half, winning them on their own criteria is often a good way. If, however, top half already won the opposing bench, you probably need a better weighing than that to win. To sum this all up, the main metrics we consider when assessing two teams on the same bench would be extent of analysis, impact, intuition, and relevance. Let's address vertical extensions. First, just remember, it is extremely rare for teams to have nothing new at all. Look through everything the team said. New examples, new nuances, new impacts, everything can be a new material and should be credited. We don't get to brush our responsibility off as judges by just saying you were a derivative without explaining why and why the material was not new. However, again, newness is a prerequisite, but not a sufficient prerequisite to necessarily win. If a team had new analysis, it's not always a winning one. How do we assess that? First, consider whether they gave new examples of the same analysis or new actual reasons. So if I just give a new example of an existing analysis without explaining anything unique to this example or any new reasons that are applicable to it, I am probably derivative. I am using my openings material on a different case. That is not likely to be good enough to be winning. Another thing to assess is, were the reasons given to an already proven link or to a missing link? So if I fill in a link for top half, that is a good direction to potentially win over them and make them contingent on me. But if I prove something my top half has already proven, then it's not clear why my reasons are necessarily better than theirs. More on that in a second, you can still win them. And lastly, consider if the link is also an important link or an unimportant link. Classic case would often be in impact extensions. In many debates, teams agree that the impact is important, they just disagree on which team wins it, and then just giving an impact extension and analyzing for 14 minutes why killing people is bad is not likely to be very, very convincing on why your side should win the debate. So the steps we need to do is first assess what is new from closing team. Secondly, assess if these new things are new reasons or derivative and just new examples. Thirdly, is assess if it on a new link or on an already proven link. And lastly, is the link important or unimportant? To extend a bit more on the idea of an already proven link, it is possible to win on an already proven link. In most cases, if OG already gave 4 reasons why X is true, and then CG gave a 5th reason, they're not likely to win on the 5th reason. However, they can still explain, and we as judges should listen to them, why their reasons are better than their openings. To give an example, in the motion, this House would abolish maternity leave. It's possible for OG to say that maternity leave harms women because it reinforces the stigma that women are the ones who are expected to stay at home with the kids, and then women see this and feel more pressure to stay at home. CG could give a different reason, saying employers are more reluctant to employ women when they know that they will take maternity leave. Which reason is better? I don't know. I don't want to step into the debate. If, however, CG were to explicitly say to me, most women want to go to work anyway because they need the money and they want independence, and the main person who decides whether or not they will get a job is not them, but their employer, meaning that our reason is logically prior because we show the employer is disincentivized, so our reason is better, I would probably give it to CG. And here, an important thing to remember is weighings are just the same as arguments. They need to be analyzed, they can't just be asserted, but also, if they are analyzed, unchallenged, and no competing weighing is given, it is the same as an argument that is fully analyzed, unchallenged, and no competing argument is given. We might not agree with this argument in real life, but we wouldn't refute the argument. We wouldn't step into the debate and say this is wrong because I disagree with this. The same should go for weighings. If a weighing is proven, we should accept it unless someone within the debate gives us reason not to accept it, even if we can think of other weighings ourselves. We should try to be as little interventionist as possible. And if a weighing was given, we do not want to insert ourselves and give a counter weighing to this. One last thing that I wanted to say, there's a couple of common mistakes that are often relevant to vertical extensions. So first, the stakeholders kind of extension, which is taking the same analysis that top half said, but showing how it impacts minorities, or showing how it impacts developing countries. If there is new analysis that is unique to this stakeholder, then it's fine, and you can definitely potentially win on that. But if it is using the exact same reason, but only saying in developing countries, this is exactly the same as just giving a different example, and we should not credit this as winning. A second common mistake is the heuristic of time. So when we assess how much analysis was given on a certain link, we don't buy into a team just saying, well, top half just said it in a minute, I'm going to analyze it in my full 7 minutes. It is completely possible to analyze something in a minute, maybe not great, but to make it stand. And it is completely possible to say full on nothing for 7 minutes. Time is a bad heuristic for how much something is actually proven. Look into new reasons, look into new mechanisms. Don't look into how much the timer says each team gave each point. Lastly, on contradictions. So just a reminder of the world's manual, there are no automatic fourths, there is no additional penalty for having a contradiction. We only don't credit the material that is contradicting to the top half. How do we assess this? A, we can still credit everything that is not contingent on the contradictory material. It's possible for CG to have 2 points, one of them contradicts OG, the other doesn't, and then we can still credit the second point. Or it could be that 1 reason out of 3 reasons contradicts OG, but we can still credit the 2 other reasons to prove the first point. So make sure that you don't just automatically stop listening to a team that has a contradiction. Secondly, on assessing the dodgy, even if is something that teams can often use to prove something in a non-contradictory way while saying that their opening might be wrong. However, some teams also exploit it and just say full-on contradictions and say, but even if. How do we differentiate it? Basically, we go back to the rationale behind why contradictions are not allowed in the first place, and that is to give a fair chance to the opposing bench to engage with your material. Ask yourself, was it actually possible for the position to engage what both OG and CG said without contradicting themselves? If the answer is yes, probably it's not a vital contradiction. If the answer is no, probably it is. To give an example, say the motion is this House as the GOP would rerun Trump for the 2024 elections. Say OO say that we should take someone more moderate to run for the Republican Party because he is more likely to get buy-in from the majority of the moderate voters. Say that then CO does an even if. They can say, well, even if we don't get the moderate voters OO want, we can still not get as much turnout for the DNC, because when they are not as antagonistic towards us, people who vote Democrat don't have as much reasons to go out and vote. So even if we don't get the moderate votes that OO wants, we can still get to win comparatively by having less votes for the DNC. This is a valid even if, because it is possible for governments to engage both claims that can exist at the same time. They can engage simultaneously that explaining why OO is wrong and you won't get more moderate voters, as well as why CO is wrong and you won't win by deterring DNC voters from actually going out. However, if CO were to say something like, even if OO is wrong and we are going to lose the moderate voters, we don't have to pick someone more moderate than Trump. We can take someone more radical than Trump and get the radical voters and win on OG's metric. This is already a contradiction that the word even if cannot resolve, because it is impossible for government bench to engage both claims because they exist on completely contradicting premises of a more moderate and a more radical candidate at the same time. So this is it for contradictions. One last thing I would say about this, there are exactly two occasions in which we can accept a contradiction from bottom half. The first is if there is a completely implausible, factually wrong claim that the globally informed voter knows is a factually wrong claim from top half, such as the moon landing is a conspiracy. It is fine for bottom half to contradict that. The second option is a prioritization claim. It is possible for OG to say our case is the most important part in the debate, and for CG to say no, our case is the most important part in the debate because it's their job. They need to weigh against their opening. If opening could just say their case is more important and CG could not contradict it, then CG could never win, right? So it is okay to contradict a weighing, not by saying they are wrong, but by saying ours is better. In general, if teams weigh by saying our top half is wrong, discredit this is a knife, like teams are allowed to explain why their arterial is comparatively more convincing, more strong, more plausible. They can't say their opening is unconvincing, weak, implausible. They cannot say their top half is completely wrong. This is a contradiction. That's basically it. And yeah, good luck with the next part.